So Tom, today we're going to be talking about house rules.
House
And
rules.
Specifically what we're talking about are like families will have certain rules for their house.
We've got some of those.
Yeah, do you have some at your house?
One of them is the daddy tax.
Ooh,
So
the
if
daddy
I buy
tax.
my boys something, like we go to 7-Eleven or QD, then I get to reach in and take some out.
The daddy tax.
It's the daddy tax. In fact, I say daddy tax now, and they usually just reach in and give me some.
I like this. That
Yeah,
might
there
need
you go.
to need
Use
to
that
be an
on your
Opperly
kids at
house.
home, the daddy tax.
My kids are shaking their heads. They don't like that idea.
No.
That's not a good idea according to them.
How about you? Do you have house
We
rules?
do have some house rules too. We like to play games, and one of the games we like to play is Sorry.
Yeah.
And we're a very active house, and so we changed the rules of Sorry so that when you draw a card, you not only move your little piece on the board, but there's also activities. So if you get a 4, you might need to do 4 jumping jacks. Or if you get a 7, you might need to do 7 burpees. Or you might need to, if you get a 2, you might need to run around the whole house backwards twice. Usually by the end of the game, we're all sweaty and hot and tired. And maybe no one's won because we played so long.
Somehow
with the
you've
activities.
turned Sorry into an athletic event with those house rules.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
That's one of the house rules, I think, at the Opperly House. We have a chat question for you, and we invite you to turn to someone near you and to ask this question. What house rules do you have in your house? Maybe for games you play, for certain things, maybe you have a daddy tax, whatever it might be. We're going to give you about 90 seconds to turn to someone near you and to answer this question about house rules.
So today we're talking about baptism, and baptism at its sort of most fundamental level is joining the family of God, the household of God. And the family of God has some house rules to it, okay? Not the daddy tax. I don't get as your pastor to come and take something out of your chips bag. But
No.
there's 3 simple rules of being part of the family of God. Do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. Those are the house rules for baptism.
And we get these from John Wesley. We're familiar with John Wesley. He's the founder of the Methodist movement. He lived back in the 18th century in England. And he asked a really important question. He asked, how do we intentionally grow in our faith? How do we intentionally grow in our faith?
So he and his friends had a very methodical way of doing that, thus the name Methodist. They would gather together every day, and they would ask these 3 questions. Have you done any harm today? Is there any harm that you've done that you need to confess and repent and repair of that harm? Have you done any good? Have you actively sought out opportunities to do good? Or was there an opportunity to do good that you let pass by? And have you stayed in love with God? Have you showed up in the places that God said God would show up in? You all are here. You're at worship, in communion, in baptism, in prayer, in scripture. Each of these are places of where God shows up. How to stay in love with God.
So we've been doing this, we've asked these questions throughout this series, and we've been applying them to different areas of our lives. So we started this series by talking about political conversations. Ooh. And how do you take these 3 simple rules and apply them to political conversations? Then we continued with talking about community. And then last week we talked about parenting. Looking at these 3 simple rules, how do we apply these to these practical things we face?
Yeah. You know, I think back to that first message that I gave, the 3 simple rules of political conversations. How do you do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God when you're talking with somebody you disagree with politically? Boy, after this weekend, that message has never been more relevant, I think.
It's really important.
For how we talk across the divides, across the aisles. So if you missed that, go back, look up on our YouTube, on Facebook page, watch that message, because the way that we have this conversation following this weekend, we got to do no harm, we got to do good, we got to stay in love with God.
It's really important.
As a household of God and as a country.
Absolutely.
So
that's the thing, these rules can be applied
they
to
can be applied
current
to anything.
things.
Yeah, current events. So what we've done, and actually when you walked in, you were given a little packet, and it has an inventory in it. So take that inventory out as the 3 simple rules. And you will see that each one, do good, or do no harm, do good, stay in love with God, has a set of things kind of related to stuff that pops up on a regular basis in our culture today. And we're gonna walk through this a little bit. So keep that handy, okay?
Hey, you want that in your hand. So today we're going to explore how these 3 simple rules play out in baptism. We're going to be talking about the 3 simple rules of baptism. Now, when we talk about that, we have 3 people who are being baptized today. This isn't just for the people who are being baptized. This is for all of us. Because again, we're going to remind you throughout today to remember your baptism. And one of the ways you're going to remember your baptism is through applying these 3 simple rules to whenever you were baptized, whether it was a teenager and you
13.
remember it, or whether when you were a child and you don't fully remember it.
And you're going to get to come up a little bit later on and remember your baptism as well. So in the early church, in the really early church, the baptism included a preparation period. And that preparation period was usually 1 to 2 years. 1 to 2 years to prepare for baptism. I mean, Mark, we have like a 4-hour class?
Yeah, I
think that feels like a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what
Everyone
if we made it 1 to 2
baptized
years?
today is like,
Yeah, exactly. And part of that was a period of, like, you think about like the 12-step rules, and the 4th step in that is doing a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And they took a year or 2 to do that, to courageously review themselves and ask these kinds of questions.
that's really tough to do. So the first simple rule of baptism is to do no harm. And what this means is each of us, in remembering our baptism, we look at ourselves and we look at the places where we're doing harm, and the first thing is stop doing it.
Stop doing it.
Stop doing it. And take responsibility for that harm by naming that harm. And then the last part of doing no harm is really important. It's to repair the harm done as much as possible. And I think this is one that we can often forget, how important it is to repair harm that has been done.
So as you think about yourself today, and those of you who are being baptized, Gary and Nicole and Madison, when I ask you, just think about, where have you done harm?
Yeah, where have you allowed evil a room in your heart and in your mind?
Where have you strayed from the path of love and justice? And Mark, when I think about this idea of repairing, I recently came across this marriage counselor. His name is Terrence Reel. He's been a marriage counselor for 25 years. Sarah and I just celebrated our 25th anniversary.
Congratulations.
So he's been counseling people as long as we've been married. And he wrote this book called Us, Getting Past You and Me to Build a More Loving Relationship. And in an interview with a news outlet, they asked him, how do we fail at repairing? How do we fail at that? And he compares repair work to customer service work. You know, like, Mark, if I come to you, you work at a department store, and I bring in, I'm like, my microwave's not working. You need to repair it.
If I responded to you, well, I have a toaster at home, and my toaster isn't working.
And I'd be like, what does your toaster have to do with my microwave?
But my toaster's not working, Tom.
Yeah, what would you call that customer service? That's bad customer service,
That's bad
right?
Customer service.
Okay, you do have a real issue because your toaster does need to get fixed at some point.
It does.
But that's not my problem. We're going to focus right now. Like, this is what repair work is about. When someone's in a state of disrepair, you focus on repairing their microwave. You can get to your toaster later, okay? That's how repair work works.
That is. And to do that repair, it requires some introspection. It requires some looking within yourself. And to do a fearless moral inventory, you don't just snap your fingers and 2 minutes later you're like, oh, I'm done. That was good. I don't have anything to worry about. It's a process. And in this process, in this journey, what's going to happen is God will reveal something to you and you'll take care of it. And then God will reveal something else, and you'll take care of it. And there'll be a journey. And I would almost say that the further you go on the path toward love and justice, the longer you realize that path is. The more room that you have to grow in this.
All right, so this isn't a story about a path, but it is a story about a canoe and a journey.
Okay.
Last summer, my family did a 3-day canoe camping trip on the Manistee River. We took
amazing.
this picture on day 3 when we started to enforce an hour of silence.
Okay.
3 days in a canoe with 2 kids and constant chatter. And,
That's a lot,
about this point, we were thinking, when will this be done? When will this be done? But you know what, Mark? After 3 days, we had traveled 50 miles on the Manistee River. If we kept going to Lake Michigan, 200 miles to get to Lake Michigan. We had barely even scratched
a lot further
the
to go.
possible journey. That's what this process of repenting and confessing and repairing is like.
Yeah, I think that feeling of when is this going to end, which you experienced on the canoe trip, that can also be true in our lives, like literally, as we go through the process of rooting out sin in our lives. And I know that I've experienced this myself. There's always more. I'm on a 43-year journey in my life to become less independent and less stubborn in that independence. And at the root of that journey is me clinging to my pride. And so I'm humbled again and again and reminded of my need for dependence and to not be so stubborn. And I'll think I've conquered my pride. I think I'm moving toward being more dependent, particularly on God, and not independent. And I'll realize what happened is I just released one finger, and the other 4 fingers are still hanging on tightly to my pride and my independence. And then I'll release one more finger and one more finger, and then I'll realize all my toes are also clinging to this. And maybe that's been your experience too. We try to root things out and we realize just how deeply ingrained it is as part of us. It takes time. And that brings us to our next question for discussion. Our next question for discussion is, when was a time that you took a journey, and this could be literal like me or metaphorical like Tom, where maybe you took a trip somewhere and it took longer than you thought. So you took a trip, it took longer than you thought. We're going to give you 90 seconds. Turn to someone near you and discuss this. Have you ever had this, where a journey took longer than you thought?
So this process of doing no harm, of kind of rooting out these places in our life, it's a long process. And there's lots of different places in the Bible that describe this sort of discipleship or apprenticeship or following Jesus in the negative, as things that you don't do. So give us one example.
So, I think of the Apostle Paul when he's writing to the church at Colossians. Paul says, so put to death the sinful, earthly things lurking within you. Turn away from them.
That's good. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says several things that don't do. He says, don't do your good deeds publicly. Like if you're doing them publicly, then stop doing it, confess it, and repair it. He says, don't be like the hypocrites who like to pray in all this sort of public way. Do it privately. This is the sort of following Jesus in the negative. Don't do harm.
So we want to invite you to the Through 3 Simple Rules inventory. That's our attempt, when you pull that out, to look at the harm that's most regularly being done in our current context, in our current situation, in our modern world. So we've taken John Wesley's stuff and we've modernized it. And it's not perfect, but it gets us moving in the right direction. And I want you to look at rule number 1, which is do no harm. As you look at that rule, do no harm, there's just other, you can see there's all sorts of different things listed out there. And as I look through it, one of the things that I'm working on myself to do no harm is taking a day of rest or Sabbath. This is something I struggle with. I find myself getting really busy. I love to say yes to things, and I end up without taking a day off for several weeks. And that's a problem. That's doing harm to myself. And so I'm working on rest.
Stop doing that, Mark.
And taking a Sabbath. Exactly. Yeah. Stop doing the thing that's causing harm.
And then repair by taking some rest. This is convicting me too. This is a season in our life when we are adopting another campus as a church. We're hiring a pastor for the South Lansing campus. I've been busier than I ever have been managing more big changes. And I realized that I had gone 4 weeks without taking a day off. In 13 years of being a pastor, I had never gone that long. And so this Friday, I was like, I got to protect this day and take the day off. And then we were talking this past week, I needed to find some spiritual retreat time to take a couple days off in a row to rest and rejuvenate.
Yeah, to be with God.
Tell me, what am I supposed to stop doing?
Stop overworking. You're
there we go.
So busy. Take rest. Take a Sabbath.
Exactly. Stop harming yourself.
Confident all of you have some area of your life too that resonates on this inventory, an area where you can grow and improve. And the way we do that, again, by doing no harm, is we stop doing it.
Yeah. Mark, stop doing it.
Yes. Stop overworking.
Yeah. Mark, start taking responsibility for it.
Yes. Take responsibility, Tom.
Yeah.
Name it. And then take responsibility. And finally, repair the harm done.
Yeah, Mark, repair the harm. Rest.
Yes, do the rest.
Hold me to that, okay?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we talked about do no harm. Our second rule for baptism is to do good. This is, we need to face and embrace the love and justice of God. To face and embrace the love and justice of God. Now, doing good, you don't just snap your fingers and you just start doing good. It's a learned habit. It's something you need to practice. And it really takes a lifetime to perfect our love of God and of our neighbor, of others.
So if baptism is entrance into the family of God, then it's entrance onto the team of doing good. The family that's helping you to actively, intentionally do good in the world. Baptism is choosing not to just wait for good things to happen, but to actively and intentionally go seek them out. Look for ways to actively do it.
And that makes me think of the writer of Hebrews and what the writer of Hebrews writes in Hebrews 10, where the writer says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. This is doing good, actively doing good. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another.
Now, I do the most good when I am in a group of people who are actively encouraging each other to do this. If I'm not in a group like that, I naturally kind of focus back in on myself.
Yes. So this is really important. Baptism, as we remember and celebrate baptism today, baptism isn't just about you and God. It's about you and God together with all of us.
Yeah.
Everyone who is gathered today together. It's about us being curious together about how we can be creatively compassionate to everyone around us, to share God's love. And especially that starts with one another.
So we're all born into a family, right? And most of our families are small groups, right?
Yeah, like a small group.
And we all have this family, but most of us aren't sure that we like the family that we have, or at least some of the members.
It's pros and cons.
Of
pros
our
and
family.
cons.
And something happens in baptism.
Yes. So this amazing thing happens in baptism where you are born into a new family. A new family that's a universal family across time and space. And just like your biological family, it's not a perfect family. There are flaws that are on display in this family of God that you're joining about. And to be honest, sometimes the family does harm to each other and to the world around us. But it's a family, and it's your family through baptism.
Now, when I think of a family, again, I think it's a smaller group. My grandpa was one of 14 kids.
That's
and
a
they
big
weren't even
family.
Catholic. But most of us have younger families, or smaller families than that, right?
That's true. We're headed towards smaller families.
It's really hard to do this sort of doing no harm, doing good in a group this size. This is too many people.
It's too many people to do it really
It
effectively.
really happens inside of small groups where we learn this facing and embracing the love and justice of God. If you're not in a small group, I mean, this is one of the things we've encouraged the people who are getting baptized.
Encourage people to
be in a small group. Be in a small group.
Yeah. So our next house rule for baptism is to do good in a small group. You see, a small group is where you learn habits of love and justice. Love and justice to those people in your small group, but then hopefully love and justice to people who are outside of that small group that you're a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The best small groups, I think, have some component of helping each other do no harm, helping each other to do good, and then helping each other do the practices of staying in love with God. So pull out this inventory again, if you're able to, and look at rule number 2, and you'll see several things that are kind of the things that are relevant to our day and age. And Mark, when I look at this, one of the ones that jumps out at me is number 9, working actively against discriminatory or unjust systems. And I've been in a small group for many years in the past, and one year we decided that Sarah and I, as our family, we were going to focus every week on anti-racism work. So every week when our small group got together, we had to say, what step did we take towards that? And we never moved more deeply or fully into that commitment than having 52 times where week after week we were expected to say, how are you doing good in that way? And that really got our church as well, because firmly on that path, in that work. Such important work.
It's such important work.
How about, and that was all happened in a small group.
Yeah, so
how about for you?
I looked through this, and I focused today on number 13, and part of the reason I focused on that is we're in a large gathering in a new space, and one of the things we always talk about at Sycamore Creek is who's on our hospitality team. Do any of you know the answer to that question? Raise your hand.
Raise your hand if you're on the hospitality team.
If you are on the hospitality team, raise your hand. Here's the cheat.
Yeah.
Everyone is on the hospitality team. You should
let's
all
try,
be raising
let's try
your
that
hand.
again.
Let's try it again.
You're
Who is on the hospitality
team this morning,
team?
Who is it? The only people who are not are if you're here for the first time, you're not
If you're here
on
for the first
hospitality
time,
team.
hopefully you're warmly greeted.
Yeah.
But I think this is really important as we head into our adoption of Asbury to keep in mind. We're going to be having a whole new group of people who are going to be joining our church, who are going to become part of the community of Sycamore Creek. And part of the way we practice hospitality is we look for people who are new and we warmly greet them and we welcome them into the church of Sycamore Creek.
And they're joining us next week for the first time. Like the adoption takes effect next Sunday. So when all these new people show up next week, who's on the hospitality team? Yeah, all y'all are, right?
Very
all
good.
y'all.
They're getting it.
And there's a next step on the back of the connection card that you can take to say, I'd like to adopt an Asbury family. So that you pay special attention to greeting somebody, going out for coffee, giving them a call, maybe even picking them up and bringing them here, whatever the case may be.
Yes.
Yeah.
So our house rules for baptism involve doing good in a small group, and that's active, that's intentional. It doesn't happen by accident that you do good. And we want to take a moment and have you reflect on that. So we're again going to give you 90 seconds to turn to someone near you and to answer this question: where do you actively and intentionally seek out opportunities to do good? And what small groups, what groups of people help you to do that? Again, we're going to give you 90 seconds, turn to someone near you, and discuss this question. So we're to our final simple rule, house rule for baptism. It's to stay in love with God, to practice the habits of keeping your heart turned toward God. At baptism, we've got a big tank up here, and you probably can't see it from there, but it's filled with water. Baptism happens in water, and when we go under the water of baptism, we die with Jesus. And then when we come out from that water, we are raised with Jesus. And like emerging from the waters of our mother's womb, we are born anew. There's a rebirth that happens in baptism.
When we talk about being born again in baptism, I think back to we have a viral video on our YouTube page.
Yes, we do.
There's over 20,000 people have watched this video. And
it's
so
by far the most popular video we've ever had.
It's like, it's like hundreds of people watch it every week. It just keeps growing. And I want you to, a little snippet of this, okay? And I want you to watch for the imagery of being born anew. And I'll give you a little hint. The first person being born anew is my youngest son, Sam.
There we go.
Here we go. I love those images, yeah.
Yes.
And it really is like they're being born anew. In fact, the average watch time in that video is right up to Sam, and after Sam's done, people stop watching it.
It drops right away, huh?
Yeah. 20,000 people watch Sam be born anew into the family of God.
Okay. Again, baptism happens with water. It's super essential for baptism, and that water cleanses us. We remember the cleansing that Jesus gives us, and it helps us to grow. The water protects us. Like you might think about a moat that's around a castle, protects the castle. And I think too of community. And like a city founded along the banks of a river, we see a lot of communities that develop around water, so too community forms through baptism, where we seek God together.
So when I think about staying in love with God, my mind goes to the book of Song of Songs in the Bible. It's a song about lovers, or it's a book about lovers, literally about two lovers. But it's also an allegory. It's both things. It's also an allegory about God's love of us and our love of God. And one of the most beautiful lines in there is, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. And that could be being spoken between lovers, literally. It could be me speaking to God. It could be God speaking to me.
Ooh, I like that.
I mean, that's a beautiful thing, to say, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. Or for God to say, you are my beloved, and I am yours. That's really powerful.
That is really powerful. And the basic question here is, what do you need? What do you need in your life to continually remember that God is present and to turn your attention and your heart toward God moment by moment?
One of the ways of talking about this is thinking about practicing the presence of God. Which is a little funny to say because really all we're not, God is present with us all the time.
Always.
What we're doing is
Whether we're aware of it or
practicing
not.
being aware of it. And I go back to a series that we did earlier this year called the Common Rule Challenge, and we talked about some habits that are daily love of God and weekly love of God. And the daily ones were to read some scripture before you pick up your phone and check your text messages or scroll through social media. Do something prayerful before you do that. And then kneel 3 times a day and pray to God in the morning, at noon, and at evening time or bedtime. Those are daily practices of staying in love with God.
There are also weekly habits that we talked about. So weekly habits like Sabbath, again, an important one for me, to rest and worship with other people, help us stay in love with God. And another weekly habit we talked about that really will show the things that are revealed in our heart is to fast. And we encourage you to fast once a week. Now, I can't emphasize enough that we do this loving God, not by ourselves, but in community. We do it with other people. You see, you're not baptized into Jesus so that Jesus can be your boyfriend. You are baptized into community. It's not Jesus and me, it's Jesus and we. Now, in case you can't see that t-shirt there, it's a guy where he's wearing a shirt and it's got a picture of Jesus on the top and it says, Jesus is my boyfriend.
And a hat. I'm getting both of those
And a
for you
hat.
for your birthday. Would you
Okay.
wear them?
I don't think so. That'd be quite a fashion statement.
So let me tell a bad pastor joke to make a point here. Can I do that?
You can, and it is a bad pastor joke. I've heard it.
So a Baptist, a Catholic, and a Methodist get together, and they all have the same problem. They have bats up in the bell tower. And they're like, how do we get rid of the bats? And the Baptist says, well, I called the exterminator, and they were gone for a week, but now they're back. And the Catholic said, well, I tried to put up those bat houses so that they'd live where they're supposed to live, not in my bell tower. And they didn't like those houses, so they stayed in the bell tower. And the Methodist said, you know what, I figured out the secret is I baptized those bats, and I've never seen them again.
I told you it was really bad.
Our culture so emphasizes the individual experience of what we're going to do here that I can't tell you how many people that I've baptized that are not part of our church or, in my knowledge, like any church at this point. What we're doing here today, it's not about the individual. It's about the family of God. It's about us together.
It is. God has a preference throughout the entire Bible for community. We see this in the beginning with Adam and Eve, community.
God called Abraham and Sarah.
Israel was made up of 12 tribes.
And Jesus replicated that with 12 disciples and a whole lot more.
Yeah, and Paul planted church families, not individual Christians.
And the book of Revelation describes heaven as a new earth and a new city, a city of people.
City. So our house rules for baptism include staying in love with God, and we do that. We practice the love of God together in community. It's so important.
So pull out your inventory again. Rule number 3, stay in love with God. We've got lots of things that are listed there. Mark, when you look over those things, what jumps out at you for yourself?
Well, I already confessed to busyness, so it probably won't surprise you that number 2 jumps out at me, and that's spending unhurried time with God. It's so easy to just want to move from one thing to the next, to think about my to-do list, and the key here, I think, for me is just unhurried, however long that is, where I'm just present with God in that moment.
Yeah.
And I continually need to work at that in the busyness of life.
We don't mention a time.
There's no time
It's not
on
like
it.
60 minutes.
Yeah.
For some of us, we're doing good to get 5 minutes
We
of
would be.
unhurried time with God.
Yeah, so
When
how about
I-
you, Tom?
When I look at it, I look at number 8, which talks about praying, worshiping, and reading scripture with a family. And we've been over this last year as a family with my kids at breakfast, opening up a hymnal. We sing one verse together, and then we read through the Bible. We're just one story at a time. We're in John right now. We didn't start in Genesis. We started in the New Testament. And then we wonder about it and ask questions about it. And then we pray for each other. And that takes about 10 or 15 minutes. And in a lot of ways, that's my unhurried time with God in the morning. Sometimes it's
really
not
good.
unhurried, though.
Yeah.
Trying to get the kids out the door at the same time. During the summer, we bumped it to dinner time.
Nice.
So we have a question for you. Turn to a neighbor or chat in the comments online. What habit of loving God together with others can you practice over the next month? And after we're done with that, we're going to baptize some people.
We are.